Well, welcome to your first session of group marriage counseling. I know you didn't think or you didn't realize when you came this morning that you had signed up for that, but you did. Some of you aren't even married, and you didn't, and you're here for our group marriage counseling. But today we come to 1 Corinthians 7, and this is where Paul really turns his attention to the subject of marriage and what all of that means. And so the thing that I'm really excited about as we get into this, and we'll spend 2 or 3 times kind of working through all of the details. We're just kind of doing a flyover today, and then we'll dig in a little deeper as we work our way through the rest of this chapter. But the biggest problem is that in America, as Cody talked about a minute ago, we have this really skewed, non-biblical view of what marriage is. If you just Google, I did this week, Google, what is marriage? This is the first thing that pops up. The legally or formally recognized union of 2 people as partners in a personal relationship. Historically, and in some jurisdictions, specifically a union between a man and a woman. Wikipedia is actually a little worse, because it takes input from really anybody, right? Anybody can go in and change it. That's the way I understand it. Marriage, also called matrimony or wedlock, is a culturally and often legally recognized union between people called spouses. It establishes rights and obligations between them, as well as between them and their children, and between them and their in-laws. And of course, there's some truth in that, but there's a lot of vagary and untruth in that as well. To get a good definition, I pulled off the shelf my Nelson's New Illustrated Bible Dictionary. It's short, but it's finally, this is marriage. The union of a man and a woman as husband and wife, which becomes the foundation for a home and family. Okay, that's a lot better, because that's actually based on the Bible. And so here's where I think some important details kind of come in, and where I want to kind of walk you through the 5 core commitments of our church, which we've talked about often. They're on the coffee table, they're on our cards, they're everywhere, right? A high view of God, a high view of His Word, faithful discipleship, gospel centrality, and joy in community. And actually, all of those come into play as we are looking at this passage and even thinking through marriage and the Bible. First of all, a high view of God, right? We have to care more about what God says about something than about what the culture says, or our neighbors, or our friends, or our coworkers, or our family, or even what the government says, right? Because as the Catechism says, God is the creator and sustainer of everyone and everything. And so what our culture says about marriage today is actually radically different than what God says about marriage. And I think we're probably all very aware of just the radical change in everything that has happened just in the last few years, and this ongoing acceleration of the rate of change. It's changing faster and faster and faster. But as the creator and sustainer of the universe, God is the ultimate authority, which of course leads us directly into a high view of Scripture, which is relevant to all of this as well, because where God has spoken to us is His Word. And in a day when these so many so-called pastors are advocating for so many things other than what's in the Bible, and they're submitting to the authority of the world rather than the authority of the Most High God, we need to continually remember that we must place ourselves under the authority of this book, not the other way around. Sola Scriptura matters all day, every day. The formal definition, I think, is very helpful when we think about this, right? The inerrant Scripture is the sole source of written divine revelation, which alone can bind our conscience. The Bible alone teaches all that is necessary for salvation from sin, and is the sole standard by which all Christian behavior must be measured. And rather than seeking something more, seeking something else, we simply need to study God's Word and obey what we already have. Scripture is sufficient, especially when we're thinking about marriage, the most important human relationship we have. Faithful discipleship is a part of this, right? Paul is eminently concerned about the behavior of the members of the church in Corinth, and even beyond that, even to us today. And as we think about discipleship, really the best definition is that we are striving to help one another follow Jesus better. That's what discipleship is. And then, of course, joy in community comes into that because we're called to do things in community, right? We're sheep. I read this years ago, and I think it's so helpful even today. We are sheep. It's not safe to go wandering around by yourself out on the hills alone. There are wolves out there. Sheep need shepherds. You're meant to be in a flock, in a fold, and that's part of God's wonderful plan for your life. That's one of the joys of community, is that we encourage and support one another in the ins and outs and the different aspects of our lives. And of course, gospel centrality, and that's kind of where we're going to land at the end today. We'll come back around because marriage is a picture of the gospel. It's intended to put the gospel on display. So we have to get marriage right to have an accurate display, an accurate portrayal of what the gospel is. If we get marriage wrong, we get the gospel wrong. So open your Bibles to 1 Corinthians chapter 7. And today, really, we're going to look at Paul's first answer to the Corinthians. He has, apparently the Corinthians sent Paul a letter asking him some questions, asking him to clarify some things. And so he's writing in response to that. And really what this is today is a practical application of the Bible's teaching on marriage. We're just going to start and look at that and lay down some basic principles and expand on them as we go on. Have any of you ever heard a marriage joke, right? You know, I think we probably all have, right? And there's so many of them. You know, well, my wife, da-da-da-da-da, or, you know, my husband, that, or, you know what you call a wife who, ... right? Or did you hear about the husband that did this or that? Many of us, I know I am, are guilty of having told those jokes in the past. I would think probably all of us are guilty of having laughed at one of those jokes in the past, right? I remember years ago, I was on a mission trip, and we were all kind of we were sitting down for dinner, and there was this guy, he's a deacon and a Sunday school teacher, very respected guy in our church. His wife is on the trip with us, and we're about to sit down eating, and he tells this wife joke. And it wasn't vulgar or anything, but it was just kind of like, he gets to the punchline, and we're all just kind of like, all froze for a minute, and then everybody, and I only know what I was doing, but I'm 100% certain everybody else was doing the same thing. We all looked over at his wife to see what is her response. She laughed. Okay, so we can laugh because it's like, you know, so, but let me offer a different perspective on that idea. Rick Holland, a pastor of Mission Road Bible Church in Kansas City, he says this: jokes about marriage have come from Satan's workshop, which is basically his way of kind of expanding on what John Calvin says when he says this: unless we think and speak honorably about marriage, reproach is attached to its author and patron, the Lord. Meaning, if we have a high view of God, we have to have a high view of marriage, and we have to speak highly of marriage and think rightly about that. And that I think, is really kind of one of the foundations behind the passage that we're looking at today in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. So I'd invite you to stand with me in honor of the reading of God's Word. We're in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, and we're going to begin in verse 1 and read through to verse 16. It's 1 Corinthians 7. This is the word of the Lord. Now concerning the things about which you wrote, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. But because of sexual immoralities, each man is to have his own wife, and each woman is to have her own husband. The husband must fulfill his duty to his wife, and likewise also the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And likewise also the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Stop depriving one another, except by agreement for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer and come together again, so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. But I say this as a concession, not as a command. Yet I wish that all men were even as I myself am. However, each man has his own gift from God, one this way and another that. But I say to the unmarried and to widows that it is good for them if they remain even as I. But if they do not have self-control, let them marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion. But to the married I give instructions, not I, but the Lord, that the wife should not leave her husband. But if she does leave, she must remain unmarried, or else be reconciled to her husband, and that the husband should not divorce his wife. But to the rest I say, not the Lord, that if any brother has a wife who is an unbeliever, and she consents to live with him, he must not divorce her. And a woman who has an unbelieving husband, and he consents to live with her, she must not divorce her husband. For the unbelieving husband is sanctified through his wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified through her believing husband. For otherwise your children are unclean, but now they are holy. Yet if the unbelieving one leaves, let him leave. Then the brother or sister is not enslaved in such cases, but God has called us to peace. For how do you know, O wife, whether you will save your husband? Or how do you know, O husband, whether you will save your wife? Let's pray together. Father, we thank you for this instruction on marriage, and as we live in a world where the thinking and the definitions are so all over the place, where there's just so many different approaches to this, Lord, we want to think biblically. So as we study your word today, as we consider it, and even in future weeks, and as we go back and look at this and think about your design and your plan for marriage, Lord, let us be more fully committed to your truth, and let us continually keep ourselves under the authority of your word. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. You can be seated. So we began, really, the first point, and kind of as we're walking through this, there's sort of three major sections as we look at this passage, with marriage and singleness, or marriage and celibacy, because singleness and celibacy are synonymous here in this passage. Of course, Paul opens by saying, of course, according to the things you wrote, right? This signals a shift in the letter. So for the rest of 1 Corinthians, Paul is essentially addressing these questions that they've written. And now we don't know if he's answering the questions in the order that they were asked, or if he has put them in a specific order that makes sense to him. I think he put marriage first for a couple of reasons. One, he's coming out of 1 Corinthians 6. He was talking about sexual immorality, and so when we comes in and this idea of husbands and wives really flows right out of that. So thematically, this works, it flows. But also, of all the different questions that he was asked and the different things he's going to address, this places a fundamental importance on marriage and on what it is, and that we have right thinking about it. Because just like our culture is all over the place in thinking about marriage, so was the Corinthian culture. They were all over the place. They did not think rightly about marriage. So there's still some correction going on even within this. And of course, the biggest problem that I think the Corinthians faced was that they were influenced by culture more than by the teaching of God's Word. And that's even a significant problem in so many churches today. We have to constantly push back against the philosophies and theories and ideologies of the world and reorient ourselves to God's Word. Let me give you an example. When I was growing up, we were members of this swim club, or this club that was right up behind our house, and they had a pool, and I would go almost every day. I would go be at the pool. I would be at the pool all day long if I could. And the only annoying thing about the pool was that every hour on the hour, for 10 minutes, they had adult swim. So, of course, there's 50 kids in this pool. Me and all my friends, we're just all there. And then you would hear the whistle. They blew that whistle a certain way. I can still hear it. And then they would say, adult swim, everybody under 18 out of the pool. So we would have to get out of the pool and wait for 10 excruciatingly long minutes. And I asked them one time, why do you do that? Well, really, it was two reasons. One, it was to give the adults some time to just relax in the pool and not have to deal with the crazy of the kids. But it was also to make the kids rest, to get out of there for just a minute. And that's one of the things that I think we need to do continuously ourselves. Maybe not every hour for 10 minutes, but we swim in the reality and in the cesspool and in that crazy ocean of wrong thinking all day, every day. And so we need to step out of that and make sure that we take a break from being in the midst of that and consider what God's Word says about everything. We need to constantly make sure that we're retuning ourselves, right, to what God said. It's the extreme immorality that was at the center of chapter 6 has now done a pendulum swing, and we're going to look at that here in just a second. But it seems as though the Corinthians were trying to figure out every conceivable way they could do things wrong, because they're constantly swimming in that. We need to step out of that. And that's what we're doing. We're stepping out of it so we can look at the right way to think. And so as we even move into this next thing, what Paul immediately jumps in to address is this pendulum swing that they've done. They understand at least in some sense, that they're in this weird, crazy immorality of Corinth and of the thinking. But some of them, in fact, I would say many of the people in the church, had done this extreme pendulum swing to the other side, to this extreme other side. And that's what we're really talking about. So as we move into this chapter, we need to understand one of the main points I think that Paul wants to drive into us when it comes to marriage, singleness, and all the surrounding issues is this: don't be in a hurry to change your marital status. There's a lot of different reasons that people would do that. That anytime you go from one status to another, you need to be slow, you need to be careful, you need to be considered. Doesn't mean you never make a change, but even if you get nothing else out of this passage that we're looking at today, please understand first and foremost that marriage is a very significant thing. It can be overemphasized in one sense. The Jews really overemphasized marriage. And they went so far as to say, if you're unmarried, you're being disobedient to God. The Roman culture, of course, would underemphasize the importance of it. And our culture today does that. It's misunderstood in so many different ways. But marriage is an extremely significant thing. It's not something to be taken lightly. So whether you are considering entering into marriage, which anybody that's not married should be, in one sense, if you are married, or even if the idea of divorce is something that's been out there, I hope it's not for any of you, but even if it's out there, understand that any change in your marital status is always a major, major decision, and it's not something you take lightly because of its importance to God, which is probably the really, I think, the main reason Paul puts this first and addresses these issues first. Because it flows out of the immorality, but it is of the utmost importance just in general in life. Because when it comes to marital status, there's two options. You have marriage for a Christian, marriage or celibacy. Those are the two options. If you want to say singleness as a Christian, you're also saying celibacy as a Christian. Those two things, those are the only two options. And just to make sure we're clear, again, I know we read this definition, but marriage is one man and one woman living as husband and wife, and the intent is for life. So we don't want to be unclear about that, right? Marriage is the foundation of the family, it's the foundation of society, and it's the foundation that God has given us for human flourishing in general. And anything other than one man and one woman living together as husband and wife is something other than marriage. End of discussion, right? No matter how hard you try to convince yourself that something else is. But I think the Bible is absolutely clear on that. So now we get into verse 1 right here. Now, concerning things about which you wrote. Okay, so we're going to start addressing those now. And he just jumps right, this is the deep end of the pool. He jumps right in. It is good for a man not to touch a woman. Now, he's talking about celibacy here. The word touch is a direct reference to the intimacy between a husband and wife. It's a euphemism used for that the Jews would commonly use for that. So if you are single, this is your situation. This is God's will for your life. Singleness is a good thing, he's saying, but singleness is also celibacy. And again, the Jews thought wrong about the idea of singleness versus marriage. They thought that if you are single and beyond the age where you could get married, you are in direct violation of Genesis 1:28 that said, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." And then even looking at Genesis 2:18, it's not good for a man to be alone. So they had this mindset that you are in direct violation of that if you are single. Now, and that's wrong. That's not true. That's kind of Paul is trying to put that out, set that aside. They're wrong about that. And we know that we as humans are created for relationship. We know that we're not supposed to be hermits. We need to live in community. And marriage, which is the most intimate, most common, and most fulfilling version of relationship, and it's the closest relationship possible. But Paul is making sure we understand that it's not required. It's not the path to perfection. It's not the ultimate goal condition for men and women. It's not the high and holy standard. He's saying that it is absolutely okay to be single. Singleness is good. Singleness is honorable. In fact, and we'll look at this as we move through the passage, there's many advantages that come to being single. But singleness is not superior or more spiritual than being married. In fact, singleness comes with built-in difficulties that he's going to talk about. It comes with temptation. Celibacy is difficult. And again, this ocean of immoral insanity that we all swim in makes singleness particularly burdensome and difficult for almost everyone that's in that situation. And so because of that, because Paul is telling us, man, that temptation is there, hashtag the struggle is real, as he wants us to see that. And marriage is not just, it's not an out for the physical side of things. It's not just an escape valve. And it is actually the plan for the majority of people. But again, it's not required. Marriage is not the key or the primary path to holiness and sanctification. And Cody read Ephesians 5 earlier, showing us that Paul actually does have a very high view of marriage. Some people will take this passage and say, Paul had this very low view of marriage. He didn't think it's just kind of okay, whatever. You got to be single. That's where it's at. That's not what Paul is saying. He has a very high view of marriage. Singleness is good, he's saying, as long as it includes celibacy as the primary part of the definition. But also, he's telling us marriage is good. Neither condition is inherently superior to the other. Both are what they are, and both are good. So, but of course it's good to be single. So why would we get married then, right? Okay, well, I think we need to look at that. We need to think about that, right? If it's good for a man not to touch a woman, meaning to be single, to not be married, then why would we get married? Well, then this isn't necessarily directly from this passage, but one of the reasons we get married is for procreation, right? Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. That is actually one of the purposes of marriage, right? So procreation is the first one. The second one is pleasure, right? Proverbs 15 says to be glad in the wife of your youth. Let her satisfy you at all times and be intoxicated with her love. And there's a whole multitude of pleasures, not just in one category. I know our minds kind of immediately go to one category, but there's a multitude of pleasures that have to do with being married. Enjoy them all, right? And one of those is partnership, right? The woman, back in creation, back in Genesis, the woman was literally created to be a helper. To be your helpmate. And so a man should rejoice in the helper that God gave him, and the woman should rejoice in the one God gave her to help. So there's this partnership that is one of the purposes of marriage. Marriage is also a picture. It's a picture of the gospel. We talked about that. We'll talk about that more in a few minutes. And this actually might be one of the most important things that you can know and understand and recognize about marriage. It's not just a tax benefit. I'm not sure it even is a tax benefit, but I don't know. We'll ask our accountant later. But it's not just so that you can fit in with your married friends, right? I mean, I was single for many years, and almost all of my friends were married, and it's fine. You can fit in with that. Marriage is not just to end the struggle of celibacy. Marriage is ultimately intended to be a picture of the gospel and a reflection of the awesomeness of what Jesus has done for us. And again, we'll come back to that because that's the best part of all this. But marriage is also for purity, right? Because there's a protection that marriage gives you. A protection from immorality, a protection from loneliness, a protection from many other things. But understand, and I think Paul would want us to know as we read this passage, singleness is good. Marriage is good. Neither is inherently superior to the other. But unfortunately, at Corinth, as we've really, I don't know about you, but I've kind of come to expect from our Corinthian friends that however they can get it wrong, that's what they're going to do. They're going to get it wrong, and they're going to take it in a wrong direction. There were people in this church, maybe many of them, that really seem to have kind of gotten confused between the whole idea of marriage and singleness and celibacy and purity and holiness. And somehow they had come to the place where they had become convinced, at least many of them, that celibacy was inherently superior spiritually, whether you're married or not. That was sort of the next level of spirituality that they had decided was the case. So there were many that even in marriage had decided to practice total abstinence, not just as singles, but as married people. And they thought this is the apex of holiness. We have arrived because this is now our thing. Now, there were probably also some who were pursuing that because maybe their spouse was an unbeliever, and the idea of joining Christ to an unbeliever was something they didn't like. So they're trying to maintain purity in their lives, and they thought, this is how I stay above reproach, married to a person who's not a believer. But Paul comprehensively denounces that whole concept in this passage. And that's a completely man-made thing. It is not something that came from God. Verse 3 is very clear. The husband must fulfill his duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And likewise also the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Stop depriving one another. Because intimacy in marriage is part of the picture. It's just part of it, and it's reasonable, all of that. Because remember, all the way back in chapter 6, you're not your own. You were bought with a price. Glorify God with your body. Your body belongs to the Lord. And so, as a single person, you have to glorify Him in your body. As all people, we have to do that. But as a married person, there is a sense in which your body belongs to your spouse. And that has implications in so many different areas. Like when we first came and moved to Joplin, we started looking at houses. And my wife had a specific type of house that she wanted. We wanted to live out on the country, out where there's land, where we have all the options of animals. We didn't even look at a single house in town. Like somebody said, hey, there's this house I just heard of for sale. They just dropped the price $30,000. You should go look at it. We lived here for 3 or 4 weeks. And I was like, okay, I'll check. So I called Amy. I said, hey, I found out about this house. She goes, where is it? I said, well, it's in town. Nope. Okay. But that's part of, it's like, yes, she owns my body is hers. And so where my body lives she needs to be in on that too. So it's the obvious we're talking about, but it's the other things too, that there's this partnership that goes on with that. And we need to be happy for that and go into that. Of course, the application for singleness, your body belongs to the Lord. The application for marriage, your body and everything you are belongs to your spouse. Now Paul does give a concession. If you and your spouse both determine that, for a purpose of prayer, for a purpose spiritual, we're going to take a time and set that aside, that's okay. It's not required, but that's okay. But it's always to be a temporary thing. It's a concession, not a command. But then verse 6 and 7, so that kind of walks through that just to make all of that very clear. This whole idea of celibacy as the apex of spirituality is bogus. And then we get to verses 6 and 7, and they're here for a reason. They follow right in behind this marriage and celibacy teaching to bring us to the main point. That your while marriage is sanctifying, and all of us married understand that and would agree that, sanctification is not this exclusive product of your marital status. He's not saying, okay, if you can't say if you want to be spiritually superior, you have to get married. Or he's also not saying, hey, be like Paul, be like me. I'm single, celibate, sanctified. That's the only way to go. We should print that on a t-shirt, right? But it's so easy for us to distort biblical truth, right? To take the biblical teaching and twist it just a little bit. As we all know, the best lie is mostly true. And we have this tendency to want to wrap our holiness around these self-made rules, especially the rules that I'm good at, and make those the rules and the way to get to sanctification and get to holiness, as the Jews had done with all of their extra rules and things that they had done. Marriage is good. It was instituted by God. And yes, it's going to be the norm for most. It's a great blessing, but it's not a requirement. It's not that you're going to be able to achieve a level of sanctification married that you never would single. It's not even a prerequisite for serving as an elder or serving as a deacon. It's not the perfect path to holiness. Marriage comes with many blessings, but singleness is not a second-class citizen condition. And I think sometimes we have that mindset, right? I mean, there are practical advantages to being single. There's freedoms that it allows you. You can move around with these. A lot of things are simpler, but marriage is not inferior. In fact, my wife increases my effectiveness in ministry. Children are a joy, and they're sanctifying. Man, aren't they? But there's a joy in marriage that you don't have as a single person. But there are benefits as a single person that you leave behind when you get married. And God gifts each of us uniquely in this manner, just as He does in other areas of our lives. Our goal and purpose should always be to faithfully serve the Lord with the gifts that He has given us. And those may change. You may have the gift of singleness for a while and then not. I mean, I was in my mid-40s when I got married. So we need to constantly, though, be focused on serving the Lord with our gifts, with our abilities, with our passions, with our energies, with all of those things, and never envy or malign or anyone who doesn't have the same gifts that we have. Neither singleness nor marriage is something to be prideful about. It's simply the situation God has you in now, and that's okay. Don't be in a hurry to change it, but pursue God's path, God's plan, God's timing, which is perfect. Be patient, be persistent in pursuing Him. That's really what I think Paul would have us understand from these first 7 verses. And then we get to verse 8, and we start to see some other principles come into place that are actually very helpful as we think about marriage. And here's where we really need to pay attention. Because the world around us, for the most part, has fully bought into a false definition of marriage. And connected to that, a result of that false definition of marriage is just radically wrong definition of really everything surrounding sexuality in any way. And that brings us really to the second major emphasis, is that whether you're single or married, it's all for God's glory. And in any culture, you're going to have both married people and unmarried people. And he basically is going to give us ultimately we're going to have 3 categories of singleness. There's those who are divorced, those who are widowed, and then the single and never married people, right? And the single and never married are going to be addressed more specifically later. But here we're talking about widows and the unmarried. Those are the 2 terms. And a widow, of course, we know is someone whose spouse has passed away. And the unmarried are essentially those who are divorced, is really what we're talking about here. And I think in the Corinthian church, there were probably many who had been divorced before they were saved in that thing, because the Corinthian culture allowed for divorce and in just almost in numerous ways, right? So there were likely in the Corinthian church many who had been divorced at some point. I think enough so that they're like, we want to know, we need to understand more about this. And once again, Paul says it's good to stay single. Don't rush into marriage again. And here's where, so many Christians want to play matchmaker. And not be content to let singles remain single. But we have to be careful. We have to let God do His work. I used to call it, remember, I was single for a long time. I called it the threat. And as a young single guy in a church with all of these people who wanted me to be married, which is cool. I mean, I wanted to be married too. But I was just focusing on doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Very often, at least once a month for 15 years, I would have someone come up to me and say, "Oh, I know someone that you should go out with." All the time it happened. I was even, my grandma called me one time and said she lived 6 hours away, and she had met a girl at the grocery store that she thought I needed to meet. And I'm like, "Grandma, you live 6 hours away." Sure. But I learned really early on, this was just my response to what I called the threat. "Hey, I've got somebody you need to go out with." And I said, "Okay, sure." I said, "Sounds great. Set it up, let me know." Because 99% of the time, there was no follow through. They just thought it was a good idea. So I'm just going to let God do what God's going to do. A couple of times it did happen, and it was just like, but whatever. It was when the Lord brought me the amazing Amy but that's we won't go into that story. You know part of that. But staying single is not inherently wrong, right? Getting remarried is not inherently wrong. Remarriage is allowed in certain situations, right? Verse 9, I think, is pretty clear. This is talking about those who are widowed or divorced. If they do not have self-control, let them marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion. You see, even if this burning passion, which is the way he described it, doesn't result in an actual incident of immorality, it's still not a good thing to live in this constant struggle. So for the one who has not been given the gift of singleness, which Paul had been given, pursue marriage. That's totally fine. And I would say that even in our culture, where the age of getting married seems to be getting later and later and later, I think as committed Christians, we should kind of come in on the opposite side of that. And I get the irony, but I'll tell you, I'm a proponent of early marriage. I got married in my 40s, and I get it. I understand that. And don't get married just to get married. But if you're tracking spiritually, and if the other person is tracking spiritually, and if you know you want to get married, don't wait. Get married. Just this past weekend, Todd, you all know Todd, the pastor of the Anchor that's in us, his oldest son, who just turned 18, just got married. It's great. I'm excited for him. John MacArthur says this about this whole idea of early marriage. He says, the practical problems of an early marriage are not nearly as serious as the danger of immorality. I think that's very helpful. And so there are some guidelines for marriage. And let me tell you a couple of universal guidelines for marriage. First of all, who not to marry? Unbelievers. Right? 2 Corinthians 6 tells us don't be unequally yoked with unbelievers, and that's certainly an unequal yoking. So there's your first thing. Someone who is not a believer is going in a completely opposite direction from you, and it will not work. So number one, don't marry unbelievers. Number two, don't marry just any believer who says yes. You have to be careful. Yes, and theoretically, any two Christians who are truly committed to Christ, to honoring Him, and to living in a way that honors the Lord could, in theory, have a good marriage. But that doesn't mean you just marry the first person that will say yes. So how do you choose who to marry? And if you have the notes, these are in your notes. But just a few principles for choosing who to marry. Number one is look for the right person. And that means someone you can love and commit to for the rest of your life. I dated, before Amy and I got married, several women who were not the right person. I'm not speaking poorly of them in any way, but they were not someone who I wanted to love and commit to for the rest of my life. It's just simple, right? Obviously, someone who is saved, someone who is obviously a Christian, right? If you're a girl, you want to look for someone who you can follow their leadership spiritually. If you're a guy, you need to look for someone that you know will encourage you and support you and be your helpmate. You need to always look for, whether you're a girl or a guy, look for somebody who is clearly in pursuit of sanctification. Look for someone you're attracted to. Look for someone you're compatible with, someone that you enjoy being around. You need to have a reasonable compatibility with them. For example, if you want 15 kids and they want no kids, that's going to be a problem. I mean, it will. You might not be compatible. If you're determined to one day live in New York City and she wants to go live in the jungles of Costa Rica, that could be a problem. And you don't have to have perfect alignment in everything. And they do say opposites attract, okay. But don't push it to the limits, right? You do need to be compatible with and enjoy one another. And here's another thing. Seek the input of church leaders. Ask your pastors. Ask your elders. Ask other church members. Ask your parents what they think. Your parents care more about you than anybody else. Their input matters. That they're going to do that. And let me also tell you this, that the kind of person you date is the kind of person you're going to marry. Right? If you're like, well, I don't want to be married to this kind of person, then don't date that kind of person. Because if you don't date them, you won't mate them. I don't know. That may not be the best way to put it. We need to think about that. If this is not the kind of person you want to be married to, then you should not even go out on a date with them, because dating is for the purpose of marriage. So anyway, we'll move on. But more important, I think, even than finding the right person, this is way more important than finding the right person, is to be the right person. You need to worry about this far more. I mean, it's easier actually to find the right person than it is to be the right person, because that takes effort. So in the meantime, while you're thinking through this, you need to have a right focus. Focus on your pursuit of Christ. Follow the instructions of Philippians 4, right? Whatever is good and noble and true. Think about these things. Have your focus on the right thing. Don't put yourself in temptation's way. Lean into what God has provided for you. Be wise. Pursue things in a correct way. Do it in the community that you're in. Ask for accountability. Ask others to help you and to be involved in that. It's not some little secret thing that nobody knows about and that you just suddenly, hey, I'm getting married. Weird. Who? I knew nothing about that. That shouldn't be a surprise to the people that you're in community with. Number 3, be thankful, I would say, right? You look for the right person, be the right person, but be thankful. Be thankful for what the Lord is doing in your life right now. Don't be dissatisfied with where He has you today, but be thankful for where He has you today. If you can't be thankful for where God has you today in the situation you're in now, why would you think that you could be thankful for a different situation? Be thankful for what He is doing. If you're not happy with what's going on today, why would you be happy with what's going on tomorrow? And again, and there's another thing about this, is this isn't just marriage advice. This is life in general, right? This is life advice. We're actually commanded to be thankful always. And our ability, our desire to be thankful to God, if it is situational, meaning based on whether or not I like the situation, you'll probably never be a thankful person. You'll be waiting for that perfect situation forever, and you'll never be happy, and you'll never be thankful. So be thankful for where God has you right now, today, at 11 o'clock. And number 4, be patient. God is at work. God is always at work. He is always weaving things together for your good and for His glory. His timeline is perfect. Trust in His sovereignty and trust in His perfect plan for your life. God is good all the time, and His plan is best all the time. So keep all that in mind as you think about marriage and pursue marriage and help others as they are in pursuit of marriage. And then we come to this third section, and this is kind of the last kind of full section in this passage. The D word, right? Divorce. It's kind of, doesn't it sometimes feel like the divorce is like the ultimate dirty word in the church? You know, and there are, I'll just say now, there are faithful Christians who will come to different conclusions about some of this than what I'm going to share with you today, which is what I believe the Bible teaches. So I'll just say that. But there are some very distinct things we need to understand going into this. Because again, whenever you look at any passage, you have to look at it in the context in which it was written. And in the Roman world, in the city of Corinth, the world that Paul wrote to, that these people were living in, there were 4 basic kinds of marriage going on. And they had different kind of funky names, but I'm going to kind of call them really what they are. The first one was tent marriage, because there were a lot of slaves in the Roman Empire. And there would be marriage between 2 slaves. If 2 slaves wanted to be married, and if their master said, yes, that's fine, they could live together, and they would call it marriage. And it would go on for as long as their master said it's okay. He could bring it to an end at any time. But that was the first kind, right? And it's very likely that some of the Christians here in this church were in those kinds of marriages, because many of the early Christians were slaves and they became Christians. And so many of them were probably in that kind of a marriage. There was a common law marriage. If you lived together for a year or more, you would be considered married in this particular manner in this culture. There was also what's really probably best described as a business marriage. And this is appalling to us, and it should be, but a father could sell his daughter to a prospective husband. That was a legitimate thing that they did in that culture. And then there was the and I hope I'm saying this word right, conferitio marriage. And this was the marriage of the nobility, of the sort of the upper class. And it was a very, very, ceremonial type of marriage. In fact, much of the marriage ceremonies that we do today are really almost copy-pasted from this marriage, right? They were marriage ceremonies. They would have both families would be involved in these conferitio marriages. They exchanged vows. The bride would wear a veil. They exchanged rings. There would even be a bouquet, and there would be cake. I mean, you can't have a wedding without cake, right? But even in that day, with these different kinds of marriage, divorce was very common. It wasn't unusual or considered strange for a man to have been married 20 or more times, because they would just kind of in and out of marriages, no big deal. There was also, and I find this really interesting, that in the midst of this time when marriage was so confusing, there was a distinct feminist movement going on in the Corinthian culture, where wives would compete against their husband. They would compete against their husbands and other men, certainly, in business. They would even have contests and try to best them physically to show they were stronger than their husbands. That it was not uncommon at all for husbands and wives to just kind of be pursuing their own thing and not care about what the other one is doing, but just kind of doing their own thing. There was really a very distinct, everyone does what's right in their own eyes vibe going on in this culture. And in the Corinthian church, I think they probably had all 4 kinds of these marriages going on. And there were certainly many people in this church that had been divorced. There were probably many that had been divorced and remarried. And there were many certainly that were married that they had gotten saved, but their spouse had not been saved. And they surely came to church by themselves, because an unsaved spouse in this culture would have no interest in that church stuff, or whatever they would have called it at the time. So Paul really kind of moves into this section here in verse 10 by reminding them about what Jesus taught about marriage, right? That marriage is intended to be permanent. What God has joined together, let man not separate. God intends for marriage to be a permanent, lifetime union between a man and a woman who live as husband and wife. Now, verse 7 and 8, and he's pointing back to Matthew 19 when Jesus was quoting Genesis 2 and then talking about marriage. Verse 7 and 8 of Matthew 19 tells us that because of hardness of heart, specifically in the case of adultery, divorce was allowed. Okay, so divorce was allowed. Okay, but we can never forget Malachi 2 tells us that I hate divorce, says Yahweh, the God of Israel. So the bottom line really is that divorce is not God's plan. It is allowed in certain situations as a gracious concession to the spouse who is innocent in this because of hardness of heart. Reconciliation is always preferred, and when repentance is there can be reconciliation. But tragically, there are cases when reconciliation is not possible for a variety of reasons. But what's going on here in Corinth is that there are people who are thinking wrongly, who are not thinking rightly, who are thinking they can live holier lives in some other situation, whether it be, we talked about the celibacy, that I can be holier if I'm celibate. No, Paul said. But now there are people who are thinking, well, maybe if I get divorced or if I'm not married to this lost person, then I can be holier. I can be spiritually superior. I can make bigger strides if I divorce my spouse. And truthfully, I think some of those were probably just excuses. For some reason, their culture had this, if you're done, let's move on. We're all very good at justifying our sin. We still have that PhD on the wall, framed in the living room, professional. I have a doctorate in justifying my own sin. We all have that certificate. Paul's saying no again. Don't divorce your spouse. You might have fully convinced yourself that I've got a spiritual reason to do this. I've got a holiness reason to do that. But Paul, that doesn't work. Divorce is not the option you need to pursue. The preferred path is reconciliation. Even for those that are maybe, and probably there could have been some in the church that are kind of on this path toward divorce. They're like, I'm working there. No, stop, reconcile. It really, the bottom line, one of the bottom lines, and there's a lot of them going on in here, is that if you divorced for a reason other than your spouse's adultery, you should either reconcile or stay single. It's that simple. But then there's this other category, right? This category of finding yourself married to an unbeliever. Initially that wasn't the case, but now I'm a believer and he or she is not. And we're not supposed to be in union with unbelievers. We're not supposed to marry unbelievers. And, I think Paul would say here to them, well, you know what? It might actually be true that your spouse is an ungodly, immoral, idolatrous pagan. It might actually be true that you just can't hardly stand to be in the room with them because of that. Yes, you might be unequally yoked. I understand you don't want to join Christ with immorality. I understand that you're saying, I want to be married to a believer, to a godly person. I want to be married to a Christian. And Paul actually says up front, and here, just so we're thinking, when he says in verse 10, to the married, I give instructions, not I, but the Lord. What he's really saying is that Jesus didn't address this situation. What he's about to say and the rest of it, it's not less inspired, it's not less inerrant, it's not less authoritative, it's not less sufficient. It's just something Jesus didn't specifically address. That's all it is. But if you're currently married to an unbeliever and they're not going to leave you because you're a Christian, stay married. He says, stay married. You will not be defiled by being married to an idolatrous pagan just because you're married to them. Your children will not be defiled because you are married to an unbeliever. They're not going to be defiled by your marriage. And yes, being married to an unbeliever is difficult on so many levels. I had a friend one time who got married to a woman, this happened when we, after I had known him for a while, and we lived in the same town. We both moved to separate towns. He got married. We end up in the same town. I'm like, hey, let's hang out. And I went over to hang out with him, and she was at work, and I said, hey, how's it going? Because I had never even met his new wife. I didn't know anything about her. I just knew he was married. And I said, how are you doing? And this is a guy who served in ministry, who was involved in the church, whose parents and siblings were all very involved in ministry. And he's just said, it's just really hard being married to a lost person. It was the first thing he said when I asked him how it's going with his new wife of less than a year. And fast forward a couple years and they weren't married anymore. So yes, being married to an unbeliever is difficult. There's a reason God says only marry a believer. Because if you marry an unbeliever, you're in for difficulty. You're going in opposite directions. The possibility of compromise is like almost 100%. At some point, if you're dating an unbeliever or married to an unbeliever, at some point you're going to either compromise or it's going to cause some serious problems. So don't do it. However, if you do find yourself in that situation, married to an unbeliever, you don't get divorced because of it. Because there is, and he's saying here, there's a distinct benefit that comes to any home because there's a Christian as a part of that home. It might not end up being a Christian home, but there is some level of blessing that inherently comes to a home or a family if there's a Christian involved. Right? The best way to understand that, I had a friend years ago. He got married. They had only been married for a short while, maybe a year or so, and his wife had a crazy aunt who died. And this was the crazy aunt. Nobody in the family ever even wanted to talk to her, but his wife was always nice to her growing up. She just thought, oh, she's my aunt, of course. So she had a good relationship with her aunt, and nobody knew that crazy Aunt Sally was apparently loaded. Nobody knew. So crazy Aunt Sally dies, and she inherits just this. I mean, she owned this huge piece of property that had a historic Civil War battlefield on it and all this other stuff. So they just got this giant influx of money that benefited the whole family. It didn't just benefit her, he benefited too. Their children benefited from it. So there's this inherent benefit that comes to a family because of even one believer. And even if you're the only Christian in your home, God will use that to bring some sort of blessing to that home. And that blessing may just be that they get to see what a Christian really looks like. They may get to see, children may see the contrast between a lost and a saved person when they look at their parents, and one of is lost and one is saved. So, and there is a sense in which God looks at the family as a unit. So he's saying, stay in there, stay in that family. It won't defile you. It won't defile your children. Now, they won't automatically be saved just because there's a Christian parent there, but they will have a distinct advantage because of that. But, however, he gives us this principle that if they leave you because you're a Christian, you let them go. I mean, you would certainly hope that your life would be a testimony to Christ and that the Lord would use that to bring them to a saving knowledge of Him. But you don't know, right? But God has called us to peace. Holding on to someone who's trying to leave is not peaceful. Yes, God hates divorce, and you should continue with them, striving to show them Jesus through every detail of your life. And there's no more front row, personal, close-up view of what the gospel brings to a life than to live with someone, whether as a parent or as a spouse. But you cannot make them stay in a marriage. But you also shouldn't be the reason they leave, right? They might leave because of the gospel, because of the commitments you have to Christ, because of what Jesus has done, what He is doing. But don't let it be you or how you treat them or how you behave. That's what drives them out. And it's like a case of adultery, right? You're not in bondage in this situation. The word leave, when he says leave, refers to divorce. And if your marriage covenant, I think these principles are clear, that if your marriage covenant is broken because of adultery, because of the adultery of the other person, you're not under bondage, is how he puts it here. Just like if an unbelieving spouse leaves you because you're a Christian, you're not under bondage. Now, you can't drive them away with feigned holiness, right? Well, she didn't like me because I was a Christian. No, it's because you're holding on to biblical principles. And this actually is, again, this is one of those principles that should apply in all of our relationships. Because it's real easy to be a false martyr, right? I knew a guy one time who lost his job, and he said he lost his job because he was sharing the gospel with people at work. That's what he told me. I was sharing the gospel. I got fired for that. Well, I knew his boss. And his boss said, no, he lost his job because he was never working. He was always in the break room pestering people. He was trying to share the gospel with them, but it's because he didn't work. That's why he lost his job. Again, we can make it sound a lot more holy than it really is. So 1 Peter 1, right? But to the degree you are sharing the sufferings of Christ, keep on rejoicing, so that also at the revelation of His glory you may rejoice with exultation. If you are insulted for the name of Christ, you are blessed, because the Spirit of glory and God rests on you. Make sure, however, that none of you suffers as a murderer or thief or evildoer or troublesome meddler. False humility is a thing, right? We can all very easily go down that path. Our pride wants to take over and think far more highly of ourselves. Stay off that path. Romans 12, never paying back evil for evil to anyone, respecting what is good in the sight of all men, if possible, so far as it depends on you, being at peace with all men, never taking your own revenge, beloved, instead leaving room for the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay. So again, living at peace sometimes does mean letting them go, but you don't push them out the door. And so those are some basic principles. And this is a lot to process. So I've dropped a lot on you today. There's a lot to think about, a lot to process. I know remarriage is not on everybody's radar. Probably, and then some of you, we all will face the death of a spouse, most likely at some point, except for us. Amy and I have decided that we're both going to die at the same time, right? Just go ahead and make that decision, right? But so there is relevance to this, right? For some of you, marriage is in the future, hopefully, right? We're hoping that divorce is not in anybody's path, but this really is relevant to all of us, right? And I have found it to be very powerful. Every time I do marriage counseling and I start talking through these principles, I'm struck again at how the principles for marriage that are taught in so many different places in the Bible, how the principles for marriage just apply really to all of our relationships. If we're thinking rightly about marriage and we're pursuing marriage rightly, and we take those principles and that thinking and apply that to the rest of our lives, it really is kind of universal. And I think it's because, and this is our final point, because marriage, just like everything, is all about the gospel. That's full circle to where we started today when Cody read from Ephesians 5 earlier, right? Ephesians 1 through 3 is this just wonderful explanation of the gospel, right? And we would do well to read Ephesians 1 through 3 anytime. But Ephesians 4 through 6 is the application of the principles in the gospel. And Ephesians 5 really shows us how marriage points us to the gospel in real time. And it's awesome, right? Because Christ, Ephesians 5, Christ is the head of the church. Jesus is the authority. We always look to Him. He is trustworthy. He is followable. He is awesome. In Him we live and move and have our being. Jesus, He is our Savior. He's the one who saves us. We're His church. He is our head. We are His body. We are His Savior. That's part of what marriage is intended to put on display. And let me just tell you that you can be evangelistic by having a Christ-exalting marriage, something that all of us can do. But Jesus saved us when He died on the cross. He lived a perfect life. He died on the cross. He literally saved us from our sins because God punished Him rather than us. And then His Word goes on to sanctify us. In Ephesians 5, it talks about the husband sanctifying his wife by the washing of water with the Word. Well, it's the Word that sanctifies all of us. It brings growth. It brings nourishment. It's our daily sustenance. It's in His Word that we find the fullness of joy as believers. And let me tell you, your most important relationship is not with your spouse or your future spouse. It's your relationship with Jesus. And that will impact every other relationship, first and foremost, with your spouse. And your union with Christ is this beautifully intimate relationship that's essentially impossible to describe until you experience it, just like your relationship with a spouse. And if you don't have a relationship with Jesus, today is the day for that to begin. Be reconciled to God. It begins with repentance of turning away from your selfishness and placing your trust in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And the permanence of the relationship that you can have with Jesus is to be reflected in the permanence of the relationship of the marriage relationship. Once you're truly saved, once you have trusted in Christ and placed your faith in Him, you can't ever become unsaved. And that's the purpose of marriage, is to be permanent, because that's what we're supposed to do, right? The Lord wants all of His children to know that they're saved and that they can rely on Him to take care of them and bring them all the way home to heaven, just like the marriage relationship is designed to do that as well. So the question really ultimately is, do you know Christ? Have you experienced His salvation? Because if you have, it will affect your marriage. It will affect all of your relationships, really. And your marriage can and will be a beautiful testimony to who Christ is and what He has done. You know, we talk often, or at least I talk often, about leveraging different things for the gospel, whether it be your hobbies or your passions or your interests. How can that be an instrument to lean into the gospel, or a way to open up gospel conversations with other people? Well, you know what? You can marriage your leverage for the gospel just by letting it be a Christ-exalting marriage. And even as we study marriage and divorce, the call, even within this, is to trust in Jesus, not just for salvation, but in our daily lives, in thinking rightly about these things, and in how we counsel other people, and how we think about our own marriages. And when we do all of that, we're saved from trusting in Christ, and our lives, all of the details of our lives become beautiful testimonies to the gospel, both before marriage and within marriage. So don't think that just because we're talking about marriage, it's something that's unrelated to our daily lives. No, it's absolutely part of our daily lives. It's something that, to singleness and marriage, are both things that God has put us in, and both things that in which we are to glorify Him. Let's pray together. Father, we thank You for Christ, first and foremost, and for what He did on the cross on our behalf. We also thank You for marriage and this picture that You have given us, this picture of sacrifice, this picture of service, this picture of willingness to do anything for this partnership, this union, this ultimate, intimate relationship. As the more we think about marriage and the more we think about the gospel, the more we see how they are intended to be pictures of who You are. Let these things drive us to a deeper pursuit of You, to a deeper knowledge of You, and let them drive us to love You more. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.